Good morning. Today I'm going to be taking you on a tour of my front yard garden. It is currently mid-January and it's been really impressive how much changes over the winter months here in Canada. Even though everything appears to be dead and dormant, there's a lot of new growth and a lot of changes. So I wanted to start documenting month by month all the little changes that are happening and see if my planning for each season, each month, so that something is continually in bloom or of interest, is actually taking place now that my garden is somewhere between 1 and 3 years old, depending on the zone. So I hope that you enjoy this and you come back again next month for another episode. My garden was designed to have a little viewpoint from my favorite blue chair sitting by the window, and to the outside, and my husband would pick on me for this, the arbor is crooked, but it's not crooked because it is positioned to be aligned with my sightlines from this chair. So when you're designing a garden, think about all the different viewpoints, not just from the outside of the house and from what everybody driving past is going to see, but when you're inside the house, how you're going to be experiencing the garden, because at least in Canada, there are many months where you are not outside physically enjoying the garden, but you still want to take it in, observe what's happening. The weather here has been ranging above 0 Celsius, typically. At most, we may be going down to about 3 degrees Celsius, or -3 rather. And we've not had a lot of snow this year. We've had a lot of rain. And it's been about 5 years, I think, since we had a really mild January like this. So we'll start down by the road here. So this is one of our newer additions. We received some free plants that needed a new home from a friend who unfortunately has to move out of her place, and she'd been there for about 10 years and put in quite a few plants over the years. So we were pulling them out before the house gets demolished and renovated. So this one here is Heuchera. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. And since we've put it in, you can see all the new growth along the top. There's really quite a bit that's happened. And this was planted in mid to late fall. And so all of this growth has happened during what you would consider more of a dormant season. And this typically is when a lot of the buds are already being made and there is quite a bit of growth happening. In the middle there is her lavender, which had been quite woody. I don't think it was ever really pruned back each year. So I'm hoping that by hacking it back and giving it some good sun, it's gonna really pop back. And then this one here is a burning bush, and once again, like, there is quite a lot of new growth that has happened on this one, and the buds are already starting to form. Down in the middle here, we had planted some Swiss chard that I did from winter sowing seeds last year. That worked out really, really well. Added some beautiful color to the yard. So it was both edible and pretty, and it was really cool having the mix of both edible and decorative plants this year. Originally, when we moved into the house, there was this kind of circular area here, and when I look back over Google Images, it was an evergreen that had been there, which explained a bunch of the roots that I dug up. And when we moved in, it was just a big mess of thistles and weeds, and nothing really to show for anything other than a lot of hard work. And then there was a very skinny, it was about kind of half this size, foundation planting over here. And some of the elements were doing quite well, some of the elements not so much. So we kept what we could, and then as things died and weren't situated to that spot or hadn't been maintained properly, they got hauled out, and it slowly grew, and then this part connected in with that part, and then it expanded out towards the street that way as well. So it's been an evolution. This didn't all happen at once, but we will start over here. So this here is our wine barrel that used to have whiskey in it. I believe it's about 50 years old, white oak. And I really like the way actually that it's aging and tarnishing with the rust and the darker wood tones now. It's looking quite sharp in my opinion, in a rustic sort of way. And in that we planted some blueberries, which my daughter really liked, and it's right by our front door. So as soon as we would come out in the morning, leaving for whatever adventure the day held, we would grab a handful of blueberries for the road, and they were fresh and delicious. Within here, I had also planted a bunch of lettuce last year, so I was able to have it on the less sunny side of the blueberry bushes. So it was protected from some of the summer heat and lasted into the season. Once again, made harvesting really easy for getting it into the house. I also have some hyacinth bulbs in here, so it will be really quite fragrant first thing in the spring. And then a little dianthus as well, just for a little pop of color. And the dianthus do really, really well in this garden. I picked them up as annuals and they just keep coming back year over year. And we're just letting them stay. They're turning quite big and bushy, but they're a beautiful pop of color that lasts from late spring right into the fall. And the foliage is even staying green right through the winter, which is really quite cool. In here, this was one of the existing members when we first moved into the house, but I did rearrange him. He wasn't in this location originally. This is a silver mound Artemus that was originally from one plant that was over that way, and I split it this fall, so it was looking a bit on the sad side, but it should be popping back nicely in the spring, because it always looks a little droopy over the winter. But that's a beautiful texture. My daughter loves playing with that one, touching it. It's very soft and fuzzy like the dog's. Over here we have a purple leaf sand cherry. This was a new addition in the fall. So this is going to become quite large and eventually fill in quite a bit of the space here. Over to the side we have a balloon flower, which was another haul from that friend. So I'm excited to see how that one ends up blooming, because we haven't witnessed it yet. In the back here, I had rearranged my black-eyed Susans to make room for a bunch of other things. And in between that and the purple leaf sand cherry are some salvia, some purple salvia, which I'm really not the biggest fan of. They haven't been doing that well here, and if they die, I really won't be upset. We have a bunch of grape muscari that always shoots up its leaves in the fall and provides little batches of what looks like almost green chives throughout the winter months. And then in the spring, it starts to send up its actual little flowers, and they also have a very light fragrance. Throughout, we also have a whole bunch of tulip and daffodil bulbs, some other hyacinth bulbs as well. This is one of the original dianthus. So once again, like, it's quite large and has held its green color right into January, which is kind of cool. Another one there. I coat everything in a pretty thick layer of straw to keep everything mulched down over the winter, and I do mulch with a very, very heavy hand, and then in the spring I'll pull it off and relocate it, compost it. I don't leave it on in this thick of a layer, otherwise I find that the bulbs have trouble poking up, as do some of the other perennials. But it really does help protect, especially with all the wind and these weird fluctuations in temperature. And the straw is a very cheap option. It's like $4 or $5 for a bale. So it works really, really quite well. This little brown leafy fellow here is a mock orange, and this was put in I guess about a year ago in the spring, and unfortunately last year we didn't get any blooms out of it, but I'm excited to see if it will actually bloom this coming year. Most of the plants chosen for this garden were chosen for their scent value, so that my toddler is able to explore the textures, the colors, and also the scents of plants. We've added in some new irises and some hostas that were also rescued from our friend's garden. That's the other little silver mound right there. This was a bit of a splurge. This is our weeping Japanese maple. I forget the actual variety, but I can get that and pop it into the video. And then there's a huge mound of tulips underneath. So in theory, you know, in 20 years when this thing actually grows to the size that it's supposed to be, it will fill in this area quite nicely. In a gentle weeping mound, but it's also very slow growing, so it's not going to take over rapidly. In the back there we have a Korean lilac. I think it was called Little Miss Kim or something like that, and it has so much new growth now. It has really just sent out so many new shoots since the fall, which is really quite cool. And I love its little polka dotted bark that it has. It's really very pretty with all of its little polka dots, because otherwise it's a very plain plant, which is why I've got it kind of shoved towards the back. So over here we have our little Inuksuk. It is slowly getting overtaken by the plants, but when this first went in, it was one of the bigger elements in the garden, which is kind of funny to see. Just behind it there is one of the original dianthus that I had put in, and in the front these two are some of the newer ones, and once again still holding their green color, which is just crazy. This is our first lavender. I had it in a bucket in the back and decided to pop it in out front before the winter. I guess it was 2 winters ago now, and it was kind of, you either survive or you die. I didn't really do anything special to it, and it didn't just survive, it has thrived. It's growing big, beautiful. It tends to give me double blooms each season, which is really quite nice. This is our climbing rose, and it has really filled in quite a bit from last year. I decided to chop off a lot of the seed heads throughout the year and not leave them to see if that would help force some blooms. I found it didn't make any difference, and I prefer keeping the rose hips through the winter, so next year I'll do things a little differently that way. But it's getting quite beautiful. It has yellow flowers when it's in season. And over here I have a clematis set. I had picked up like a 3-pack from the nursery, so it's one big kind of tangled mess, and I'm not sure where one begins and one ends, but it's supposed to have 3 season blooms. It has yet to actually do that, unfortunately. It has always bloomed both of them at one time, and then the last one doesn't seem to send off any blooms. I got 1 flower out of it, and that was it. But it is slowly making its way up and around. Over on this side, this is where our peony lives, and it took so long to bloom last year, but last year was a really cool, damp, weird year, so I'm hoping this year it'll bloom a little bit sooner. But it was beautiful with this fuchsia petal and yellow center. This is another mock orange here, so hopefully gonna get some good fragrance out of that. And then these are some of the rescued roses that we had from that friend of ours. So decorations are all falling all over. So this rose here was rescued, so I'm not sure what it's going to look like yet, as was that one. This one I rescued from Canada Blooms, which actually quite a few of the plants in this garden were rescued from Canada Blooms after I would volunteer there. Most of the plants get thrown out into the dumpsters along with all the construction debris, so I stockpile a bunch, fill up the back of my car, keep them indoors in the winter under my grow lights, because most of them are forced early to be able to be blooming in March, and then plant them out later on in the season. These are some newer additions over here. We have a hydrangea that's also going to be a kind of hot pink fuchsia color, another dianthesis, and then this is my oh my god, why am I having such a blank? Rosebud native tree. And once again, it didn't give me any blooms last year, but I planted it in the spring when it should have been blooming, so it was focused more on establishing roots than putting out blooms. So I'm hoping we finally get to see something out of that. But it's also been putting out some new growth over the last month or so, which is quite lovely. The kale has been one of my favorites over the winter months. It has been so much fun and has held its form really beautifully and kind of looks like a Dr. Seuss character when all the snow sits on it. And this was another winter zone. Toss it in the garden, see what comes. It did seem to attract all the slugs, but they just went after the bottom leaves, and then we ate the top leaves, so it wasn't much of an issue. In the middle there, I have, it's called Whoopsie Daisy, so it's like a mounding. It'll probably have this same sort of shape of daisies, like a Shasta daisy style. And we've got more kale. This dogwood was another one that I rescued from Canada Blooms, and it's had quite the funny shape because of everything it's been through. But the vibrancy of the red has really come in nicely, and it has some nice flowers in early spring. It still has some items that keep dying off, so I'll chop those back a little bit later. But the color has really just punched right out. It's beautiful. I can't wait for it to get bigger and be a bit more of a showstopper. I put in some phlox last year. It gave little blooms, but because it was its first year, it was pretty uneventful, so I'm looking forward to having a nice carpet eventually, because there's a few of them all around the edges here. And then we have some alternating Heuchera. I think there's 3 different varieties in here. I don't quite remember all the names of them. We also have some creeping thyme throughout, just as a little bit more ground cover so the soil is never exposed. Same thing in the pathways there. There's 2 types of thyme in there. There's a lemon one and a purple one. So when it does bloom, it's a very subtle, but it also gives off a really pretty scent. So when my daughter's doing her practicing with her climbing through all of the rocks for her balancing, she can step on that. It's a little bit softer underfoot and gives off a beautiful scent. The blazing star, or gay feather, depending on how you want to call it, did really, really well. Butterflies absolutely loved it. And the winter interest on these I really like. They're kind of like fuzzy bulrushes, and these are all seeds, so if you do brush up against them, it all just comes right off. And then we had some asters as well. These are going into their 3rd year now, and I'm actually quite impressed with how big they got over the last year. Hostas didn't do so well, but I think that is because I had tossed coffee grinds directly into the garden versus composting first, and it stunted the growth on quite a few elements that it was close to. So lesson learned, will not be doing that again. I will put it into the compost instead. The viburnum I picked it up on clearance because it had the viburnum beetle and wasn't doing so well at the nursery, but I had inspected the plant before bringing it home and didn't notice any eggs or any bugs, and I figured with the transport, hopefully it would survive and do quite well. Last year I got 1 bloom. It was really pretty lousy. This year I think I've counted up 9. But even that 1 bloom that we got, the fragrance on it was just delightful. So it's really quite nice. And then all around it, I've planted big asters. So at the same time as the big white snowballs of the viburnum, you also have the big purple balls of the asters. And once again, it kind of gives a Dr. Seuss-like appearance to this part of the garden. So once again, some more Heuchera in here, more dianthesis. I have a, oh gosh, I'm having a total brain fart again. There's another little perennial in there that I just added in the fall that will have little yellow flowers. Columbine, that's the word. More phlox as well down in here. We have more thyme in this little rocky section, and more daffodils, more asters. Back in that area, we have a few different cone flowers. The white ones really didn't do well. They barely give off any blooms. The color on them is very muted, faded out, uneventful, but the yellow ones are taking over and doing quite nice, and I prefer the yellow ones anyway, so not too disappointed there. The Mugo pine has been growing quite nicely. He's getting some little leggy bits where he used to be really nice and compact. So, and it's doing really quite well. This is one of my favorites for a pine because it stays. This is a dwarf mugo pine, and it will stay round about this size. It really won't get that much bigger over the years. Maybe a foot in diameter total is all I'm expecting it to grow. So that is the garden space in January, and things are happening. Like the buds are already out on a number of plants, so hopefully we don't get any damaging frosts. We have winter interest in the colors of some of the items and the textures of some of the other ones, some of the evergreens as well. My daughter is still running through the arbor, doing her little laps through the mailman path. And then it's just a matter of waiting for some snow to cover everything up so it looks a bit prettier. We also seem to be the wind catch of the neighborhood and collect everybody's garbage. I don't know how it happens. All the garbage ends up in our yard all the time. So it's just about time to also take down the Christmas decorations, and then this garden will be bedded down, and we probably won't be spending that much more time in it until March or April, when we start to see some of the growth coming up. So thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this, and we'll see you again next month.